In the heart of Czechoslovakia, under the shadow of the red flag, there are whispers of once told tales of hope and struggle. Simple lives, yet complex times. Join us, comrades, as we journey back. Welcome to another episode of Maps and Metaphors. I'm your host, Pranav. Today I'm joined by my friend Victor and his mom, Lenka, both hailing from the Czech Republic. Together, we will delve into the era of communism in Czechoslovakia, guided by Lenka's first hand stories.
Okay. Hello, I'm Victor, and I'm going to be the co-host for today. And what are we talking about today, Pranav?
In today's episode, we are going to talk about communist times in Czechoslovakia and, more of the experience that Lenka had, living through those times. More around that and bit of stories, curious questions.
Hmm. Yeah, so that's actually the reason I'm here, because I'm too young to have lived through communism, but we also brought my mom here, and I'm going to be translating for her, just to make that clear to our listeners so that they are not confused. So if you hear me speaking Czech, then it's me speaking to my mom.
Yeah,
That's
you are
how
the
we...
most important person in this episode.
Oh, thank you. No pressure.
My name is Lenka and I was born in 1957, and I would like to tell you something about my life in Czech Republic.
Tak jsme to zvládli v angličtině.
Yeah, there's so much like people from my generation and all around the world, and maybe people from your generation also don't know so much in detail. And I think that that's the whole point of having this episode to know really personal experiences, what you have lived through, and how different is the world we live in from those times, and
Hmm.
and how we can appreciate more of the current times.
Mhm.
Yeah,
So thanks again for being on this episode.
Yeah,
We'll get started.
let's get started.
yeah. Thank you.
For our audience, can you explain what does a communism means and what was so different about it, from the time that we are living in? Like a general definition to start with.
OK, sure. Tak první otázka je, jestli bys mohla nějak vysvětlit, co to vlastně je komunismus a no, nějaký takový úvod pro lidi třeba, co vůbec nevědějí.
No, tak to je asi otázka. Komunismus, no, my jsme nežili v komunismu, my jsme žili v socialismu. Komunismus měl být vrchol té éry. Komunismus je v podstatě, že všichni mají stejně a všichni se mají úžasně a dobře. A my jsme k tomu měli s tím socialismem
Yeah,
směřovat.
OK, so the kind of the deal with this is that what really my mom and her generation, they weren't really living under like full communism, as a full communism is like an ideal form of government where everybody everybody can get everything they want. So what the government at that time said is that we're not actually living under communism, we're working towards it, and for now we're living under socialism.
A hlavním principem je to, že vedoucí silou v tom státě je strana dělníků a rolníků, ne inteligence.
Main principle of communism is that the leading class, in the sense of a social economic class, are the agricultural workers and the factory workers, or the working class. So maybe I'll add a bit of my commentary. So like the basic idea of communism is that it identifies these classes in society, like the bourgeois class, which is the class that owns the means of production, and then the worker class that actually does all the work. One of the ideas is that in the capitalist society, most of the power it is with the bourgeois class, because they own all the means of production and the power and the money. And what communism tries to do is through revolution overthrow this bourgeois class and give the power to the working class.
Celý to souvisí samozřejmě s ekonomikou, protože ekonomika je plánovaná a neprobíhá tržní ekonomika. To je taky jeden ze základních
Yeah,
principů.
so one of the basic principles is also that there is no free market as in capitalist societies, but it's all pretty much a planned economy, or command economy maybe is the proper English term for it.
So, if I also understand, the bourgeois class is more of a elite class.
Yeah,
Is that a
the
good-
bourgeois class is supposed to be like factory owners and this kind of stuff.
Okay, like the big shots in simple words.
Yeah, like basically the people with money in
Mhm.
Western societies.
V podstatě není osobní vlastnictví a všechno vlastní stát. Jo, čili továrny vlastní stát, všechnu energetiku, všechny zdroje, všechno vlastní stát. Jako soukromé
Yeah,
vlastnictví
so another idea
neexistuje.
is that there should under communism there should be no private property. So all the factories and businesses are run by the government. Yeah, even
Byty,
apartments,
nic
land,
takového.
everything is owned by the government. And there's no, for example, you cannot just like go and start business on your own. That's not allowed.
Okay.
Or at least like if we're talking about Czech Republic between 1945 and 1990, that's how it worked. Because there's the different flavors of communisms were existing at some points around the world.
Yeah, I think it would be an interesting conversation that we are going to have in this evening, talking about more into the details, personal experiences, how things were working, how was the daily life, etc.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's deep dive into it. So and also we are talking about Czech Republic, as you mentioned, Victor, 1945 till 1995, right? So
Kdy byla revoluce 1988, že jo?
89. 89 a 68, včera bylo výročí, tak jsem si to spletla. 68 bylo obsazení Československé republiky a 89 byla revoluce.
A komunismus se nás začal 48, že jo? Okay, so the communism in the Czech Republic was between 1948 and 1989. To be exact, yeah. So basically since the end of the World War II until the end of the Cold War, pretty much.
yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm very curious to know how was the daily life, Lenka, when you were growing up. How was the time and how was the life as a kid?
Já jsem se narodila v roce 1957, čili to je rok, kdy nastoupil prezident Novotný, který měl trošičku představu ne tak tvrdého řízení státu. Nicméně se mu to vymklo z rukou a jedna z těch 5 letech dopadla velice špatně, stát se dostal do nějakých těžkých potíží. Takže to jsme pocítili samozřejmě i my, takže bylo dost věcí, nedostatek a tak dále. Takže denní život vlastně byl, já říkám, denodenní trauma a denodenní vítězství, ale to jaksi v uvozovkách. Protože v podstatě, když to vemu, co se týče třeba školy, začala jsem chodit do první třídy v roce 63, chodili jsme do školy ještě v sobotu a škola byla velice přísná, učitelům se neodmlouvalo, učitelé dělali nám i fyzické tresty a měli jsme strašně domácích úkolů. Bylo to proti dnešnímu srovnání hodně tvrdé. Co se týče běžného života rodiny, tak samozřejmě ta rodina nějak fungovala, všichni žili v nájemních bytech,
Tak
platili jsme za ně
trochu už, aby to
státu.
nebylo moc dlouhý.
Jo.
My mom was born in 1957. A ještě, počkej, to doplním. To byl takový ten konec toho tvrdého stalinismu, že jo? Předtím byl tvrdý stalinismus. Okay. So my mom was born in 1957, which was when new communist president came to power. His name was Novotny, and he before him the how to say it the way communism was implemented was very strict. This was very like Stalinist. So yeah, Stalin was famous for being like very very cruel, and it kind of got exported to Czech Republic too. But in 1957, this ended with this new president. He had sort of different ideas. He went a bit more soft. But yeah, anyway, some planning in the planned economy didn't work out so well, so there were some economic problems. So then, of course, my mom's family also felt that. And she says that in general, the day-to-day life was everyday trauma, but also everyday victories. And Mom mentioned, for example, going to school, where they had to go to school on Saturdays too. They had a lot of homework, and it was very strict. Like they weren't allowed to talk back to the teachers at all. They even could get like physical punishments. Yeah, I think that's it. Chceš pokračovat teďka?
Co se týče třeba té školy, tak jsme chodili 9 let, byla povinná školní docházka a existovaly základní školy a zvláštní školy. Do té zvláštní školy postoupili všichni, kdo nezvládali tu základní školu. To znamená, že v dnešní době, když byl někdo dyslektik nebo prostě, že to nebyla snížená inteligence, ale měl nějaký problém, tak to nikoho nezajímalo, vůbec tato diagnoza nebyla a šel do zvláštní školy, z který už mohl jít jenom potom do nějakého podřadného učení. Systém školy bylo 9 let do školy, pak byla střední škola, ta byla 4 roky a vysoké školy byly 5 nebo 6 let. Chceš to, Vicky, přeložit?
Jo, přeložím to. So the school system worked. There was 9 years of elementary school. After that, 4 years of high school, and after that, I think up to 5 years of university. And in the elementary school, there were also, let's say, special schools which were for the students who couldn't keep up at the normal elementary school. And back then, like they didn't really what's the word I'm looking for? At the school they didn't really recognize some kind of learning disabilities like dyslexia or things like that. So people with these disabilities, if they couldn't keep up, they were just out of luck, and they were put into this special school for like slower students, which meant that they probably weren't able to get a good job afterwards. Just some like let's say probably just manual jobs and things like that. And also, this is my commentary. These kind of special schools still existed when I was in high school, and they had like really bad reputation for like being full of problematic people or like violent people and things like that. So they weren't really nice places.
I tady v tom bylo znát, že je to zase zaměřeno na tu dělnickou a rolnickou třídu, protože vlastně děti mohly chodit ještě před základní školou buď do jeslí, anebo do školky. A to už bylo od 1 roku, mohl chodit do jeslí a vlastně rodiče, kteří pracovali na směny, což zase preference těch dělnických profesí, kteří pracovali na 3 směny, tak dávali ty děti na celý týden do jeslí.
So even before elementary school, there was a possibility to put their children into, I'm not sure what the English word is. I think it's creche or kindergarten, where the children could be or daycare maybe. But that in Czech Republic, it's split between two. There's like jesle for like the really small children, and then školka is kind of, školka is preschool actually, yeah. And even there, it was kind of apparent that the focus is on the working class, because if like the parents worked shifts, they could put the children there for the whole week. So the children were in the preschool or in the daycare for the whole week, and I guess they were with the parents only for the weekends. To s nima byli pak jen na víkendy s těma rodičema teda, jo. A když se pracovalo v sobotu, tak s nima byli jako...
Tak zase je tam dali a třeba měli volno středa, čtvrtek, tak si vzali středa, čtvrtek. Ale mohli tam být týden v jednom kuse. Fungovali vlastně to pořád. No, pak co se týče těch středních škol, byly učiliště, kam chodili děti, které se zase tak moc dobře neučili, a pak byly střední školy a tam už se to začalo ukazovat, kdo je dělnického původu a kdo není. Každý žák nebo každý člověk v té době měl prostě na sebe složku, v který bylo psaný, jakýho je původu, co dělají rodiče, co dělají příbuzní, jestli někdo z nich žije v zahraničí a tak dále, a podle toho byl ten člověk, dostával body, když se chtěl dostat do školy. Takže co se týče mě třeba, tak já jsem nebyla dělnického původu, rodiče nebyli komunisti, sice jsme nikoho neměli z příbuzných v emigraci, ale i tak já jsem vždycky měla více těch bodů procentuálně negativních než těch pozitivních. Takže byl velký problém se dostat do školy. Pokud jsem ten člověk, třeba já jsem se dobře učila, takže jsem se na tu střední školu dostala velice lehce, ale na vysokou školu už jsem neměla v žádném případě šanci. Ještě co bylo takový zvláštní u mě, se stalo to, že vlastně v roce 68, když byla revoluce, tak vlastně předtím bylo Pražské jaro, to bylo ještě skoro rok předtím, teď jsme měli výročí, tak vlastně komunisti, bylo takový trošku uvolnění, tak že zřídí pro zvlášť nadané nebo s vyšším IQ děti školy, a my jsme měli, a já jsem byla v jedné z těchto tříd, byla otevřená jedna ve městě, jako ten experiment. Učili nás, to bylo, když jsem chodila do 6. třídy základní školy, čili mě bylo 11 let, od 11 let, a učili nás to, co učí ty 16letí na gymnáziích. Měli jsme stejné osnovy. No, bylo to velký trauma, protože samozřejmě jsme těm věcem moc nerozuměli, a po 2 letech tohle to skončilo, protože přišly velké represe v roce 70, přišla doba temna. Takže to skončilo, ale mohli jsme chodit na jazykovou školu, takže
okay.
to
a jenom se zeptám pro sebe, a to jako body jako fakt ti počítali jako číslo, jo, že ti dali? Aha.
Jo.
A to bylo prostě teda jako...
Když jsi dělal zkoušky do té školy, tak to bylo bodované, ale jinak si měl složku, kde to bylo napsané.
Mě zajímalo, za kolik se počítal třeba dělnický původ prarodičů nebo tak. Yeah, give me a minute. I have to think back about what they were talking. Oh yeah, so like Mom said that basically at schools back then it was not only like starting from high school. Basically, it was not just about your grades, but what the establishment took into account was also, say, your parents, if they are from the working class, so say what their jobs were, or your grandparents, even your relatives, if they're workers or not, or if any of them emigrated, and things like that. And then for the entrance exams, they actually really tallied all of this up and came up with some points, and based on that you determined what kind of school you could go to. Basically everybody back then, at some office somewhere, there was a folder with all of this info about if your parents are working class, if you're working class, who's member of the party, and so on. And that affected your life quite a lot. So in my mom's case, her parents weren't from the working class; they weren't members of the Communist Party, so her chances to get to a good high school weren't that good. But what happened was that back then, as we mentioned, the regime was kind of softening a bit, and they were trying to experiment a bit. So they opened some kind of special school for gifted children, and my mom, where they chose more based on the grades. So my mom managed to get selected and go to this school. But then after 2 years in 1970, there were some changes in the establishment, and they changed their mind and they canceled this school. But they allowed the children to transfer to language school instead.
Já jsem jenom chtěla doplnit ještě, co se týče toho vzdělání, aby třeba nedošlo ke zkreslení, jo, ještě s tím studiem.
Tak to asi
ještě
můžeme
asi bych
získat.
chtěla doplnit. Jo, ještě, takže jsem chtěla doplnit to, že vlastně kdo byl chytrý, nadaný, tak přece jen měl šanci třeba něco vystudovat, ale musel potom při práci. Takže hlavně se to dovolovalo na školy nebo na profese, o které nebyl tolik zájem, což třeba bylo, já nevím, pedagogické fakulty a tak, protože učitelé měli velice nízké platy. Takže vlastně já jsem pak při práci ještě chodila na pedagogickou školu, a zrovna tak byly ještě doplňková studia, čili dneska by se to nazvalo bakalářským, a tam vlastně z té práce se taky mohlo chodit.
My mom wants to clarify, just to make sure everything's clear and there's no misinformation, that if somebody was talented but maybe didn't have the right background, there was still a chance for them to study something. But then the way to do that was mostly while they were already working. They could there were options to study while working, which my mom did. She studied pedagogy, and mostly this was an option for professions that were not so popular, maybe, which being a teacher is one of them, because teachers weren't getting paid well. Se tam učitelům platili málo, protože jako učitelé jsou inteligence, jo, nebo to nejsou ty dělníci.
No, proto inteligence všeobecně měla nižší platy než dělníci.
Yeah, I asked mom why that was the case, that the teachers weren't getting paid so much, and it's just the case that in general, like the let's say they were called intelligence, like I guess what we would call white collar workers or not manual workers. They were getting paid less than manual workers in general.
A vždycky se to zaobalilo za to, že to je poslání a ne
they
povolání.
always like excuse this by saying that it's like a cause, like not a job. Yeah, basically it was like everybody was working for the government, right? So the government set the salaries and things like that, and I think it was pretty much just ideologically motivated that they were saying like, we're going to give more money to the blue collar workers, and in terms of taxes, for example, like everybody was contributing the same, but the worker class people had other benefits. For example, they could go on vacation more easily, or they got nicer vacations. Their children were it was easier for them to get admitted to some free time activities. And so one more thing that mom mentioned is that at the time basically everybody was like under the radar or surveilled by the secret police, and what they like to do is if you were like a white collar worker or somebody who doesn't work with their hands but like with their head mostly, and you did something they didn't like, they would take away your white collar job and tell you that from now on you're going to do something some very blue collar job, like shoveling coal somewhere. It was kind of a punishment they like to use.
Yeah. I think my understanding was more around this, what you explained. So basically, what I was trying to say about the white and blue collar job was that as a blue collar job, for example, you're shoveling the coal. or maybe you're building some houses, it was probably seen more laborious and requires more of your physical efforts. So that had a it was perceived as that you are really putting more efforts compared to some uh,
Mm,
white collar jobs where you are just not using so much of physical, but it highly depends on your
mm,
skill or your ability to crunch some numbers
mm,
in your brain, or maybe some design work, maybe more at the
mm,
architectural level, or which doesn't require you to be in the factory for
mm.
several hours. For example, pedagogy, or maybe
Yeah.
psychology, or maybe those kind of things. So
Jo,
yeah.
tak on říká, že to chápe teda jakoby tak, že ty vyšší platy byly tím, že jakoby z toho pohledu té komunistické ideologie jakoby ty manuální pracovníci třeba jakoby přispívali do té společnosti víc. Tak to asi tak nějak to bylo, ne?
Ne, tam to vůbec, tam to nebylo, tam ty peníze až takovou jako roli nehrály. To bylo prostě proto, že ten intelektuál mohl škodit tím, že mohl se třeba udělat revoluci, nebo revoluci
Jo,
přeháním,
takhle.
třeba se prostě bouřit, nebo tam šlo o to, aby ten dělník dostal víc peněz pro to,
Jo,
aby se
takhle.
najedl a mlčel.
Hmm.
Jo, protože aby se najedl, mlčel a měl ty benefity a řekl, teď je to super fajn, my jsme jeli zadarmo takhle na dovolenou do hor a
Jo, takže
můžeme si koupit
jako,
božku,
že
kolik
myslíš, že to
chceme.
vůbec nebylo o tom,
No,
jakoby, že třeba... No,
no to ne, jako ten základ nebyl, to vůbec nebylo tím, jo, proto to nedostávali. To bylo proto, aby prostě mlčeli, protože samozřejmě člověk s nižší inteligencí klade čemukoliv menší odpor. To vzdělání, vždycky je vzdělaný národ, prostě jde více
mm-hmm.
dopředu a neposlouchá, že jo. Tyhle ty prostě těm stačí ty bazální potřeby
Okay.
uspokojený a
Okay,
mlčej.
interesting. Yeah. So my mom kind of doesn't agree here so much. Like I think what you were trying to say is that like through the lens of communism, if you look at it, then the manual workers are contributing more to the society. And my mom doesn't fully agree with that. She said I'd say the higher salaries of the working class were more to sort of placate them, just make them be content so they don't rebel against the authoritarian regime. And on the other hand, the low salaries for the, let's say, intelligentsia, or let's call it that, they were motivated in part by trying to suppress them so that they won't rebel. Like everybody who was thinking a bit too much was a bit suspicious in the eyes of the government always, because people who think for themselves too much are dangerous, and they could start contra-revolution.
Yeah, interesting. It is a very different kind of strategy and a control method that was in place. Yeah, highly calculated, and I don't know what is the good explanation that's going in my head right now. But yeah, I understand. It's something next level. I have two more questions. When you explained about the school systems when you were growing up, Lenka. So, what was it for the creative people? Because yeah, of course, uh, you used to get like a lot of homeworks, and I think most of the courses or the syllabus was more aligned in a way so that you can contribute more to the whole communist system eventually. Whatever they prefer was a better profession. You would be probably asked to study that or be forced to do that. But how was it in general for the creative people, let's say some artists or musicians or similar people? Was it was there any scope for such people, or were they always looked as something weird person in the society and was forced to follow what rest are studying? Some kind of a pressure, studying or like. pressure based, or yeah, thrown into the system. That's the right word, I guess.
Tak já to přeložím, že
Taky.
on se ptá vlastně, jestli v tom vzdělávacím systému byl vůbec prostor pro nějaký kreativní lidi a zmínil třeba jako hudebníky a umělce a tak. Jestli jakoby mohli tohle studovat třeba, nebo jestli je jenom prostě nahnali, aby studovali nějaký co víc praktického.
Ne, určitě existovaly školy umělecké, počínaje architekturou přes hudební vzdělání a tak dále, ale samozřejmě to uplatnění těch lidí bylo velice složitý. Jeden můj kamarád, architekt, ten říká, mě nechali rodiče studovat architekturu, protože byli bohatí a věděli, že já budu chudý a budou mě moc dotovat. A co se týče té hudby, tak samozřejmě mohla se vystudovat, no a co potom s tím? Tak buď se stát, když to vemu třeba zpěvák, stát se zpěvákem socialismu, zpívat socialistické písně, nebo je nespívat, ale být v podzemí a čekat, kdy si pro něj přijdou policajti a zavřou ho. Tak to byly dvě možnosti.
Yeah, so my mom says that like art schools existed, but if you studied them, then it was a bit difficult to, like find a good job or find a good job. Let's say it like that. And she mentioned that one of her friends was an architect back then, and he said that the way he liked to describe it was that his parents let him study architecture because they were rich and they knew that if he studies architecture, he will be poor and then he will be dependent on them. And then my mom said that, for example, okay, studying music, like you could do that, but then basically your options were either you would sing socialist songs, so kind of, sell your soul to the regime, or you could not do that, but then you would probably have to be underground and kind of having to wonder every day if they're going to come and arrest you today.
Bylo spoustu statečných lidí, kteří dělali to umění vlastně v podzemí, ale větší část jich byla, který vlastně byli poplatní tomu režimu a ty jezdili třeba na dlouhé zájezdy někam do Sovětského svazu, na Kubu a tak dále, a tam si vydělali jako pěkný peníze. Jinak všichni tyhle když se bavíme o zpěvácích, tak všichni spadali pod agenturu zase státní, která rozhodovala, jestli můžou nebo nemůžou zpívat. Takže bylo spousta vynikajících zpěváků, kteří prostě dostali stopku, protože třeba někde řekli jednu větu, která se nelíbila
a tak já teda asi zmíním, že jakoby tam bylo velký rozdělení mezi jakoby to umění, který schvaloval ten režim a který jakoby se mu nelíbilo, že jo? A to bylo to pak to podzemí.
On schvaloval všechno, takže tam ty ostatní museli do toho podzemí.
So the main thing here was, we kind of already got started on it, but that was that the regime kind of have to approve all art, like be it music or whatever other kinds of art. And if people made art that the regime didn't like, then we say they were underground or doing underground art. And there were many brave people who did that, but then they probably were most of the time like living poor and kind of in fear of the state. And there were other people who, let's say, collaborated with the state and only did the kind of art that the state liked. And then they could make good money and they could travel. For example, to friendly countries like Cuba was back then. Kind of sell their soul to the government like that. Also, one more thing that Mom mentioned was that officially all the artists were working for one government agency, and they got to approve basically who could work and who couldn't. And so there were cases where very talented people said one thing that the regime didn't like, and then after that the agency basically told them they are not allowed to work anymore.
No samozřejmě spousta lidí to nevydrželo a raději emigrovali, ale emigrace v té době nebyla to, co je teď, že prostě někdo odejde a za ním pak přijde rodina nebo je může navštěvovat. Pokud tady někdo emigroval, což většinou ty umělci dost často byli, tak vlastně v životě věděli, že v životě neuvidí svoje rodiče, případně ty rodiče budou sankcionováni, že je zavřou nebo přijdou o práci.
So one more thing is that a lot of people couldn't take this, and then they were sort of forced to emigrate. But emigrating back then, it was more serious than it's today. Emigrating from a communist country to a Western country, it was a serious business, because it basically meant that if you emigrate, you know that you are never going to see your family again, because they wouldn't allow you back in. And there was also the possibility, like, I think often it happened that your family then got penalized some way for that. For example, they could lose your jobs and things like that. So it wasn't something to be taken lightly, or an easy decision.
Yeah, that's very harsh, to know. I can only imagine how it felt back in those days, with so much pressure and things going around. And I was actually going to jump onto the next topic of our conversation, that was more around the travel, or like a leisure travel, with the holidays, or just traveling around. But somehow we just stumbled upon this corner of our conversation where we talked about the forced emigration, where you are forcefully made to exit the country, and the consequences are even worse. So that doesn't mean you're going to escape the system, but actually your family back home, if they're staying back there, would have to face even harsher rules, or consequences as well. So it is really sad. But in general, if I look on the other side of the story, how was it to travel or explore other parts of the world, being in the communist system?
Okay. Sure. Chtěla si tam něco doplnit ještě, nebo tady, jak jsme se bavili o tom...
Čeho myslíš?
O té emigraci, nebo tak. On teďka říkal, jakoby... že je to tvrdý a že si jakoby může jenom představit, jaký to bylo. Ale taky říkal, že už přemýšlel o tom, jak přejít na další téma, jako cestování. Tak jestli chceš tomu něco doplnit.
Ještě k té emigraci teda to, že nešlo jakoby emigrovat, že člověk by si řekl, tak teď jdu do Německa a šel, jo. Musel tam projít nějakým způsobem, většinou na černo, a samozřejmě nevěděli, jestli se mu podaří přes tu hranici.
So one more thing for the emigration, that it wasn't like you could decide at any point, now I'm going to Germany. People had to sneak across the border, and it wasn't sure that you will succeed. And the border was very well guarded, but it's a whole another topic. And so if you want, we'll move it more towards the travel question.
Nebo třeba tohle se podařilo sportovcům, určitě znám Martina Navrátilová, Ivan Lendl, významní hokejisti, prostě zůstali vlastně, když šeli někam hrát, tak už prostě se nevrátili.
For example, professional athletes did this sometime when they were out abroad to, play some matches or whatever, or take part in events. Sometimes they just stayed and didn't come back. For example, Ivana Navratilova, if you know her, or Martina Navratilova, sorry.
Martina.
You'll have to edit that out.
No, that's okay. Maybe you can give a little bit of background of that player.
No, she was a famous tennis graduate. He was a famous tennis player, yeah. And who emigrated at some point, just didn't come back from abroad. And we had a few hockey players who did that too, or other athletes.
Okay.
No, koho se potřebovali ty komunisti hodně zbavit, tak mu vzali občanství a vyhodili ho někde na hranicích, ať si dělá.
Yeah, so one more thing that even I didn't know about, but if the communists really didn't like you and they wanted to get rid of you, they would take your passport, take your citizenship away, and just drop you on the border with nothing, and It's like, take care of yourself,
That's horrible, I guess.
Yeah, lovely.
And what about, like, you also mentioned Cuba, right? So, for example, like, about the situation many decades ago, I think it definitely and surely would have been very complicated. But if someone has to go to another communist country, was it also very difficult as a person wanting to spend some holidays outside? Must
Okay.
have been
Yeah, no,
very
I think
weird,
that's
right? Like,
a good question. A on se ptá, že třeba jak jsi zmínila tu Kubu, tak se ptá víceméně, jakoby, jak to fungovalo, když chtěli lidi třeba cestovat do jiný komunistické země, nebo jak často se to stávalo?
Tak na Kubu určitě jsme se nedostali, tam se necestovalo, tam jen ty zpěváci jezdili na nějaký festivaly. My jsme mohli cestovat do komunistických stran kolem hranice naší, co je, ale zase za nějakých podmínek. I když dám příklad třeba východní Německo, když jsme jeli do východního Německa, tak se muselo vyplnit takové, říkalo se tomu celní prohlášení, tam se musel napsat i prostě náušnice stříbrný, který máš na sobě, a kontrolovali velice tvrdě, protože z Německa si třeba se vozily boty nebo dětský oblečení. Takže se stalo třeba, že když celníkovi se zdálo, že ty boty, co máš na noze, si tam koupil, tak ti ty boty zul, vyhodili a dal ti na nohy igelitový pytlík. Já jsem na to měla velký štěstí na tohle.
Jako štěstí, jako že
nebo
se ti
jsme
to stalo,
jeli
jo?
na dovolenou jedno.
Super, no.
Že se mi to stalo velice často. Tak, no,
oni
štěstí v
teda
uvozovkách.
se snažili zabránit tomu, aby si tam lidi něco nakupovali, takže co já vím, tak byly limity na peníze, co si můžeš vzít,
prostě
a ty
jako bylo to zase, to byly
Jo,
věci
takhle,
prostě,
jo.
aby těm lidem znechutili všechno, aby ty lidi prostě mlčeli a zase prostě, aby tě udusali, protože když jsi udusaný, tak jsi pak
No, já se tam
vděčný
snažím najít
i za
nějakou logiku,
cokoliv,
a
že
to
jo.
je asi můj problém. No.
No ta logika tam ne, to komunisti nemají logiku. Takže to bylo třeba do Německa jsme mohli jet, nebo do Polska. Jo? Ale zase třeba jsme si tam odtamtud něco vezli a ten celník ti mohl sebrat cokoliv. Koupil jsi tam bonbony a on ti sebral prostě. A ty jsi nemohl říct nic. A vždycky, když se měnili peníze, to jsme dostávali zase jenom omezený počet těch peněz, tak si dostal razítko do toho cestovního pasu. Takže třeba do Maďarska si mohl dostat nějakých těch pár forintů jednou za rok, a když si chtěl je dvakrát, no tak si měl smůlu, anebo jsi to musel zase někde na černo ty peníze si sehnat.
Taky se jezdil jen do okolních zemí a do Chorvatska asi.
Takže se jezdilo. Ne. Chorvatsko, Jugoslávie byla jenom pro komunisty, protože na to bylo potřeba zvláštní povolení a to třeba moje rodina v životě nedostala. Jo? Takže to dostali jenom komunisti a ty mohli jet potom do Jugoslávie. Někam do Rakouska nebo do Anglie to nemohl jet vůbec nikdo, zase jenom nějaký prostě, když by tam byl festival pěvecký, nějaký country třeba, tak se tam ten člověk dostal, a nebo když tam měl někdo příbuzný a ten příbuzný mu koupil letenku nebo jízdenku, tak ten člověk tam mohl vyjet, ale tady nedostal, tady dostal, myslím, že já nevím,
a do
$8
Ruska se
na
dostal
pobyt
člověk,
nebo
nebo
něco
taky ne?
takového. Do Ruska se mohlo, ale Rusko samozřejmě je daleko, takže do Ruska většinou byly pořádány třeba firemní zájezdy. Jo. A do Ruska, když se jelo, tak se vezlo v kufru zase věci na výměnu, že jo? Vezli se tam punčocháče, podprsenky a naspátek se vez dalekohled.
Yeah, so mom says that regarding Cuba, that was not possible. It was only possible for really like singers or people who went there for special occasions. The only thing that was possible was the neighboring communist countries. So for example, East Germany, and then mom talked a bit about how it worked. If you wanted to travel to East Germany, you had to like fill in like a special form that was called, let me think about how to translate that. Celní prohlášení. Like, co jsem řekl?
Tak si řekni speciální formulář.
Yeah, I cannot remember the word right now. But what is it called if like in the airport, like you have the free lane and then you have the lane where you have to declare goods? Yeah, basically you had to like fill declaration form and you had to mention like anything of value you have with you, like including your earrings and whatever.
Yeah, like there are
and
like ESTA systems, right?
oh, it's like goods. This is more like goods declaration, like.
Okay.
So you had to declare everything of value that's on your person, like including your jewelry or whatever. And then you would be let in, and then on the way back they would check again everything that's on you. And it happened that people like to go to Eastern Germany to buy new shoes. So like the basically like the border worker, they could look at you and say, oh, like, I think your shoes, they look like you bought them there, and they could just confiscate them. They could confiscate anything on your person.
Oh, it's like today's time customs.
Yeah, customs, that's the word I was looking for. Yeah, so the customs officer, they could like confiscate absolutely everything. And it happened to my mom that, yeah, they told her, yeah, these shoes look like you bought them there, and that's not allowed, so we'll take them, and you'll be walking home with like plastic bags on your feet.
Oh, that's harsh.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, Poland was also a possibility. I asked about like what countries were possibilities. Hungary was possibility. Bulgaria, but I asked,
Bulgaria.
for example, about Croatia, which was Yugoslavia back then, and that was not possible. That was possible only for only like high-ranking communists were allowed. And then I asked about Russia, which apparently was possible, but mostly like how it happened was that there were like company trips, like a whole company would go for a trip there. And then what people would do, they would try to bring a whole, do you call it like a bag, a whole, like one piece of luggage that was full of like products that they would try to trade in Russia for products that were available only there, to bring that home.
Yeah. I think it sounds very obvious, right? Try to sneak in something and sell there, or maybe get something from there and sell back home. That's kind of,
Yeah, that's how it
yeah.
worked.
And how was it like with the visa and all those things? I guess like everyone has had a passport also back then. And did you require visa because you say some kind of authorization was needed? But did it mean was it something like visa or something different?
On se ptá, jakoby, jak to fungovalo, jako jestli v té době byly víza a jestli jakoby všichni měli pas a jaký všechny povolení byly potřeba, aby se dalo někam vycestovat.
No, pas měli všichni, ale nikdo nikam nemohl, jen do těch socialistických
No a
zemí.
jako, tak, a když se šli třeba, já nevím, do Polska, tak bylo potřeba vízum, nebo?
Tam bylo ne, do těch socialistických zemí, na Kubu ne, protože tam nikdo neměl peníze na tu letenku, že jo? Ty letenky zase byly i v jiných cenových reálech, to vůbec jako to nikoho ani nenapadlo letět na Kubu. Jo, takže se jelo do Německa, do Polska, no vlastně vyplňoval si to celní prohlášení, ale víza jako takový to prostě, to bylo, já teď nevím, jestli bylo do Ruska, prostě víza nebyly, protože si nikam nemohl, že jo, ty si mohl zažádat o vízum, já nevím, kam si chtěl, ale stejně si to nedostal a ještě tě zavřeli, protože si vůbec byl tak
No, já
drzý
jsem
a
myslel,
žádal si o to.
že třeba bylo vízum potřeba do Polska, nebo tak, no, ale...
Ne, to bylo to celní prohlášení, tam si vypisoval, co si přivážíš, že si vezeš obloženou housku, kterou tam sníš a naspátek, že si vezeš, já nevím,
Yeah, okay.
nějaký tričko.
Mom says that everybody had a passport, but it was kind of useless because you couldn't travel anywhere. Like there were no visa because you weren't allowed to travel to countries where you would need a visa. So she said that like to travel to other communist countries, the visa was not necessary, but you had to fill that customs form, like everything that you're bringing there and everything that you're bringing back. And she said also about Cuba, like, I guess technically you could travel there, but nobody even thought about it because the airplane tickets were so expensive that it was just not possible for anybody to have that kind
Yeah,
of
I can
money.
imagine. Yeah.
Also, no, no.
Ještě doplním, vlastně při každém přechodu hranice, i třeba do toho východního Německa nebo do Polska,
Okay.
se dostalo razítko do toho pasu. Při vstupu i při výstupu. Takže když třeba v roce si jel 3krát do východního Německa, tak se ptali, co tam asi tak jezdíte dělat do toho východního Německa.
One thing that happened is that you got a stamp in your passport for every border crossing, like on the way there and on the way back, even if no visa was required. And they were checking it every time. And so for example, if they saw that you're traveling to East Germany, let's say more than 3 times per year, then it was already suspicious. And they would ask you like, "Oh, what are you doing there so often?" And you'd have to explain. And also about visa, like, my mom said, like, technically maybe there were some visa, but again, nobody even thought about asking for it because it just didn't happen. And probably if you asked, then that would be super
Yeah, makes
suspicious
sense.
Jo, ono
that you even want this kind of thing,
Jako třeba víza dostávali kdo dělal v zahraničí, ale to byli prověřený lidi, že třeba stavěli na Kubě cukrovary nebo se dělali někde na západě nějaký
so like
tkalcovský
the
stroje a
only
tak
people who
stavěli.
maybe got
Takže
visa was like people who actually worked abroad, maybe, which happened, but then they were like the secret police had to like have a look at them and deem that they're like very reliable and they're not going to.
Yeah, probably very special and very rare cases.
Like very high, let's say. You needed a lot of communist points to be allowed to do that.
Yeah, I'm also curious to know, like, because there are so many restrictions, and maybe a lot of people have their relatives outside, and then you cannot visit them because probably they are not living in a communist country which is nearby. Okay, but how would the communication work? Were there any, telephones or letters, that could be exchanged or sent via post? How did it all work? Because I think there were so many restrictions on the people, right?
Yeah, sure. Tak on se ptá, jak to fungovalo, když třeba byl u tebe příbuznej v zahraničí, jakoby jestli se dala posílat pošta nebo volat, a nebo letět za nima, jak to fungovalo?
Co se týče pošty, tak poštu si mohl poslat, ale nikdo nezaručil, jestli mu dojde. Když oni posílali třeba balíček, tak ten balíček buď přišel napůl vybraný, nebo nepřišel, nebo přišel. To byla loterie. Co se týká telefonování, tak v té době telefony dostávali zase ty komunisti. My jsme třeba čekali 20 let na telefony, jsme ho dostali. Přišel, když můj táta umíral v nemocnici. A takže se chodilo telefonovat do telefonní budky. Mezinárodní hovory šly jedně z telefonní budky na poštu, to se objednal ten hovor a všechny hovory byly odposlouchávány. Co tam byla ta třetí otázka?
Když jsi chtěla někoho navštívit, kdo žije v zahraničí, jak to fungovalo příbuznýho?
Když jsi chtěla někoho navštívit, kdo žije v zahraničí, tak jedně, když to byl příbuzný, když to byl emigrant, tak si neměl šanci. To byl třeba případ jedný mojí známý, ta 20 let neviděla svého syna až po revoluci. Ty, co jeli za někým, kdo třeba emigroval po roce 48, takže už tam byli dlouho, tak je pustili, ale nikdy nemohla celá rodina. Vždycky jenom část a část zpátky, museli jim zaplatit všechny ty výlohy, co byly, a pak je prostě pustili, ale nebylo to jistý, třeba 10krát žádali a pak je třeba pustili po 10 letech. No. A všechno bylo odposlouchávané, všechno bylo řízené a kdo jim připadal jako nepřítel socialismu, tak ty neměli šanci. No.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay, so about mail, you could send and receive mail, but there were sort of no guarantees that either party is going to receive it. So what could happen is if somebody sends you something from abroad, the package could arrive like opened and with half of the stuff missing, or maybe it didn't arrive at all. And then about phones. So again, like people, like not like most people, I think, didn't have a phone at their apartment. you had to wait for a long time to get a phone. Again, it depended on like what your ranking in the Communist Party is. If you were a good communist, then you got a phone. But my mom's family had to wait 20 years until they got a phone, and they got it only shortly before for her dad died. And yeah, so like mostly people used phone booths to call, and then if you wanted to call abroad, you needed like a special international phone booth that only existed at the post office, and you had to make an appointment in advance. And then when you called, the police was listening to everything. Like, yeah, I mean, it was not like there's a policeman next to you, but they
Yeah.
were listening. And then about visiting relatives abroad. So yeah, that also depended. Like, if they are somebody who emigrated recently, then there was no chance. So they allowed only maybe people who were living abroad. They allowed you only to visit people who lived abroad, like before the communists took over, or maybe if they emigrated very shortly after the communists took over. And yeah, it was always up to the officials to decide. So again, they looked at like, yeah, how good of a communist you are, if they will allow you to go. Some people had to ask multiple times. Yeah, question?
Yeah, yeah. I think, yeah, you can continue, but I have one question. So, definitely, like the person who are living inside the country or have had some ties, they would have a really difficult time, visiting someone outside. But how was it for the relatives or even like normal tourists who were not from the communist countries to visit a communist country? For example, Czech. Let's say someone from, let's say, USA wants to visit Czech Republic, how difficult would that be for someone to do that?
Hmm. Je otázka, jak to fungovalo pro zahraniční turisty, co třeba chtěli navštívit Česko, jestli to fungovalo, nebo jak to probíhalo.
Jde o to, jaký
Jsi jako
zahraniční
třeba
turisty
říkal třeba
myslí,
z Ameriky, když
ale
pracuji.
USA. No tak já si myslím, vím, že za prvý nikdo neměl zájem tu zemi navštívit, protože proč by to dělal. Takže to bylo vlastně v podstatě až po revoluci vzniknul zájem, že ty lidi sem začali jezdit. Jinak tady prostě Američan nebyl. Jezdili sem občas západní Němci, protože se tu dobře najedli a byly tu hezký holky. Takže a ty zase sloužili k tomu, že od nich se vexlovaly ty západní peníze. Takže spíš občas sem někdo jel, jakoby třeba nějaký výzkumník nebo tak, ale to byly asi jednotky lidí. Pak asi si tady vyměňovali různí agenti, tu byli. No a pak tu byli prostě pár těch lidí, kteří sem měli, říkám, západní Němci, jezdili Rakušáci, ale ty spíš jezdili za těma holkama, no. Jako aby sem někdo jezdil chodit po Krkonoších,
a jako když člověk jel, tak
se
mohl být
nepotkal.
jakoby sám, nebo to bylo, že s tebou musel být vždycky nějaký průvodce, nebo... Aha.
Ne, to nemusel. Ale byl samozřejmě sledovaný, protože se vědělo, kdyby někdo přijel z USA a byl to člověk, který není pozvaný z nějaké školy, třeba jako ty školy měly nějaký výměny minimální teda, tak prostě tak ten člověk byl sledovaný, když ta země byla prorostlá, tady byl každý třetí byl agent, jo, takže jakoby, no. Takže když v hotelu byli agenti, když se ubytoval, tak ho někdo sledoval, ale aby když chodí po ulici, to ne.
Yeah, so the main thing there is that there weren't really a lot of foreign tourists because like nobody had a reason to visit. So the only people who visited were maybe like West Germans because they came for like cheap food and cheap women, maybe Austrians too. So they sometimes visited, but for example, somebody from the US visiting, that didn't really happen. Maybe there was some minimal kind of exchange program between universities and things like that. But in general, like nobody really visited. And yeah, foreign people were also, of course, watched by the police, like at the hotels and things like that.
Yeah, really interesting to know all those details, actually. How was it for, let's say, because you say there was so much of control, I guess there was some form of corruption as well, or I'm maybe I'm wrong.
Uh, I'd say for sure. It's tak teď říká, že asi bylo hodně korupce, že jo? A to asi bylo, že jo?
No, tak asi to nebyla korupce v tomhle slova smyslu, jako je třeba u velkých firmy, třeba zakázky, že jo, že tak to prostě to nebylo, protože to bylo všechno státní, ale v podstatě člověk musel mít všude známý, aby něco sehnal. Jo, takže jako ani to se netýkalo tak jakoby těch úplatků jako finančních, ale spíš, že si měl někoho známý a ty zase si dělal něco a poskytl si. To bylo v tom běžném životě, jo, když mluvím o běžném životě.
Tak já třeba zmíním nějaký ty pospultovky a takové věci, ne, abych mu dal příklad.
Jo, to bylo
Yeah, so corruption, like, Mom says it's a bit different than, like, the corruption we mean today. Like, today when we talk, we usually think about some, like, like crooked government contracts or things like that, which didn't really happen back then because all the companies were owned by the government. But it happened sort of more in day-to-day life. But even there, it was not so much about exchanging money, but it was more about exchanging favors. Like, you kind of needed to have acquaintances everywhere to get favors done for you. So, for example, like, I'll give you an example. There was a lot of problems with, like, certain types of goods, like, there just not being enough of them. So that's where this came to play. Like, for example, you want jeans. Jeans were like a highly desirable product, but there was never enough of it. So, for example, the shop only got, like, I don't know, they got a new batch of jeans, and it would disappear immediately. Like, people would buy it out. So that's where maybe your friend at the shop would tell you, hey, we're getting a new batch, on this day, this week, and then you could already be there. Or they could even, like, sort of hide it for you, and then you would come later to pick it up and sort of do you a favor like that, and then you would do them a favor back. Or, yeah, I think stories I know is also, like, for example, at the butcher shop, like, the workers there, they would hide all the good cuts of the meat for the people they knew, and if you walk in there and you don't know everybody, you will get just the bad parts.
Yeah,
things
very
like that.
very different from the current times, for sure. Yeah, we cannot appreciate more, of the current time. We cannot stop appreciating the current time. I meant, with hearing all those stories, we are so grateful of the times we are right now in. Although there are a lot of ups and downs, a lot of things that can be improved, but yeah, definitely, those were really tough times. Would just imagine, we can just imagine, I guess, people from our generation, Victor. uh, Also,
Yeah.
a thing about ownership, because that seems like a big topic, and there are a lot of questions I have, but I will keep it simple. So about the house, I for example, the house, the food, any luxury that you want to own. I guess it was probably not allowed, but
I lost you for a while. I heard you mentioning house, food, and
yeah. So how was it for the ownership when I talk about the very basic necessities of life? For example, house, food, car, or even, let's say,
yeah, okay.
groceries. Like how did that
Yeah,
function?
okay. Okay, cool. I'll ask. Jo, tak Pranav říká, že teda, že to, co slyší, že potom jakoby si víc cení toho, v čem žije teďka. To jsi asi rozuměla, že jo, no. A pak se ptá na další věc, jakoby s vlastnictvím, jako jak to fungovalo, jestli, jako co asi, jakoby tak v základu, co mohl jako člověk vlastnit, jako si bydlení, auto a nebo třeba i jídlo, to asi mohli lidi vlastnit, ale on se na to ptá. Tak to fungovalo?
Ano, tak co se týče domu, tak nešlo koupit pozemek, tím pádem nešlo stavět dům. Jediný preference, kdo toto měl, byli zemědělci, který prostě mohli stavět své pomocí dům na nějaký pozemky, který jim dalo to družstvo. Pak bylo pár jedinců, kteří udrželi vlastně hierarchicky třeba za posledních 100 let, že měli nějaký dům a udrželi to byla moje kamarádka, ale zase, která má dům po prababičce a nevím, jak se stalo, že jim to ty komunisti nevzali, protože v podstatě všechno se skonfiskovalo, že jo, komunisti, všechno je vlastnictvím komunistů, tak vzali všem ty domy. Těmhle nevím, jak se jim to podařilo, že to zůstalo, ale museli v tom domě, protože se jim zdál moc velký, tak jim tam dali nějaký lidi cizí do toho domu. Jo. Ale to je úplně výjimečný případ. Většinou všechno se skonfiskovalo, připadlo komunistům, udělali se pozemky, jednotný zemědělský družstva, fabriky se skonfiskovaly, všechno. Takže vlastně všechny byty, které byly, stavěl stát a vlastně přiděloval je stát podle toho, jak se kdo komu líbil. V pozdější době potom vzniklo takzvané družstevní vlastnictví, že vlastně ten stát dal pozemek a ty lidi postavili si ten dům, ale byly to bytový domy, zase pod řízením toho státu. Jo? A stavěli je sami a platili za to peníze. Ale to bylo až v pozdější době, jo? To družstevní vlastnictví. A zase ty družstva vlastnil zase stát. Takže to je tohle, co se
so first, domů, housing, the most common situation was that all the property was owned by the state, so people were just renting. So after the revolution in 1948, they just confiscated everything or most of everything. There were some exemptions to this, like my mom was telling a story of some of her friends who, when the communists came to power, they were living in a family house. And somehow the house didn't get confiscated, so then they managed to keep it in their possession through the generations. But one thing the communists did is that they said, "Oh yeah, this house it's a bit big for you, so these like strangers will live with you from now on." And then they made them have to accommodate some strangers there. A bit of an exception to this was the agricultural workers. Again, they were sometimes given like a plot of land where they were allowed to build a house by themselves, by their own hands. And I think later, sometimes during the later communism, they did what was called like an apartment. There was like a form where people could like form sort of a group together, and they would be given land where they were allowed to buy a house for themselves, but again, not like a family house, but like it's like an apartment
like
house.
A collective contract,
and,
maybe? I don't know.
It was like something like a collective contract where the state would give them a plot of land. They were responsible for building their own building there, and then they could live there. They built everything by themselves, and they still had to pay the government for it.
Vlastnictví bylo taky
so
stát.
the state ended up owning the building that they built in the end also.
Yeah.
So should we move on? The next question was groceries and car, right? No.
Jídlo, jo. Jídlo bylo prostě omezený, to určitě nebylo to, co je teďko. Takže co se týká třeba ovoce, to nebylo v podstatě nějaký exotický ovoce, to vůbec nebylo. Bylo na Vánoce mandarinky, na který se stála fronta, byly pod pultem. Banány byly pod pultem. Hodně lidí si dělalo to, že si dělali různý, zavařovali, prostě pěstovali si na těch svých zahrádkách a tohle využívali. Jinak třeba v zimě, když člověk přišel do obchodu se zeleninou, tak tam měli brambory a zelí. Jo, to bylo všechno. Co se týká jinak potravin, tak byl strašně úzký sortiment a v podstatě třeba, když chtěl někdo něco na Vánoce, třeba jsme si objednávali ty chlebíčkový veky dopředu, protože jinak to nebylo. No, všeho bylo strašně úzký prostě sortiment byl. Maso pod pultem, to vůbec nebylo. Když vy jste byli malí, tak nějaký vody, takový ty dětský, to bylo na lístky. No, takže to bylo takové jako složitější. Není to, že by nebylo co jíst, ale bylo to velice omezené, ale to jídlo bylo levné. Jo? Zase tam byl ten princip toho, aby ten dělník prostě byl najedený a dal pokoj. Jo? Takže jídlo bylo velice levné. Co se týče auta,
já to možná
auto si skoupit mohl.
Ještě na tu zahrádku se zeptám teda. Kde měli ty lidi, to si jako pronajímali ty zahrádky taky, jo?
Zase ty zahrádky byly takový zahrádkářský kolonie vždycky u města a to byl zahrádkářský svaz, který zase řídil stát. Ty jsi byl členem toho svazu a mohl si tam prostě za nějaký poplatek pronajmout nějaký malý takový území, políčko, třeba, já nevím, 20x20 metrů.
Yeah, so about food, like, yeah, you could buy food for yourself, but again, there was not a very big selection. Like, for example, like fruit or exotic fruit that was super limited, that was usually only available at Christmas, and then probably you also needed to know somebody, at the shop to get it. Yeah, and that's for everything. The selection was just like very limited. We mentioned the meat, so like, yeah, meat was a lot of time not really available, or only like the worst kinds of meat. And my mom gave an example that, for example, if you walked into the shop in the winter, then the only kinds of vegetables they had at that point were potatoes and cabbage, and that was it. On the other hand, the food, there was always food available, so it's not like you will starve or anything. It was just like, not a great selection, probably pretty bland, and the food was cheap. And so people did all kinds of stuff to like supplement their food. So, for example, my man mentioned that what people used to do was gardening. So again, it was like a way you could rent a small plot of land from the state for gardening, and then people would grow their own fruit there and pickle it for the winter or make it into marmalade and things like that. And again, my mom says like the overriding principle there is to keep the worker like well fed, so that they will shut up, which in this case, well fed means there's enough food, but it's not that great.
You mentioned about those fields. I think the community gardens, I think that we have in the Netherlands and many other countries, they are more as a hobby, I think, used by people. But I when you were explaining that, I was just thinking about those. So maybe.
Yeah, okay. A on teďka zmínil, že my jsme tady narazili v Holandsku taky na nějaký takový, jakoby, tyhle zahrádkářský kolonie, ale teď to mají lidi spíš jako víc jako hobby, než...
Jo, ale třeba ve východním Německu jsou pořád ty původní, jako tady jsou vidět. To
je,
tady je taky ještě hodně.
About the community gardens, they also existed in Eastern Germany, and also in my country, they're still around.
And
nyní je to spíš jakoby potřeba, že si pěstuje ekologicky, a předtím bylo, že si pěstuje
now the focus is maybe more on like bio or ecological products, but before that it was more like just to have anything, you kind of
a very different agenda in the past. And if I say like the restaurants and cafe, I think it's very much out of the question, but still, like I think there were no such thing probably, or maybe they were very rare, only for the elites or people who can really find their way.
Ty jsi na restaurace a kavárny, jestli to bylo, jak to je. Asi vememe tohle, ne? Když ten co psá, no.
Tu restaurace, dobře. No tak restaurace asi si nemůžeme představit tak, jako je to teďko. Faktem je, že v každý čtvrti, v každé vesnici byla hospoda. Protože pití piva vlastně byl to takový jako meeting point, jo, ty hospody. Vlastně tam se ty lidi scházeli, každá ta hospoda měla nějaký salonek tajný, kde se hráli na tajnačku za peníze karty a probírali se tam politické věci a nadávalo se na komunisty. Jo, tak to byla typická ta hospoda, ale v těch hospodách bylo to jídlo takový, jako nebylo zvykem chodit do restaurace nebo do hospody na jídlo. To prostě bylo velice výjimečné. To se šlo třeba, já nevím, no ani se nechodilo, my jsme nechodili vůbec. A restaurace jako takový, to prostě snad neexistovalo. V hotelích byly restaurace, ale hotelů jednak bylo málo a jednak do hotelu, aby člověk šel na restauraci, to by vypadalo velice jako divně a já nevím, jestli by to vůbec jako přežil. Jo. To by asi bylo divný, že tam vůbec jde a co tam dělá. Takže nebylo zvykem, že se chodilo do restaurace, chlapi chodili na pivo a vlastně,
jsi říkala,
nechodilo se.
Že děda chodil na nějakou tlačenku si dát jednou za měsíc nebo za týden nebo tak, ne? No.
No, to bylo do té hospody, že tam chlap šel na tlačenku, na prejt, ale jako aby rodina se sebrala, šla do restaurace a tam měla pěkné jídlo, nešla, a jednak jako všude se kouřilo, že jo, a vlastně ty děti, to nebylo nějaký dětský židličky, nebo prostě dítě, když někde ucvendlo na ten ubrus, tak prostě hned ho spražili, že jo, to dítě bylo vlastně takovej nechtěný element ve všech.
Okay, so like going to a restaurant, that wasn't really a thing that people did. There weren't that many restaurants around. There were maybe in the hotels, but what existed and existed in like, let's say every part of the city were pubs, because like drinking beer is very central to the Czech culture. So that was a thing that existed, and where people, or like men, usually went to like mainly drink beer, but they also served some food, so that was a thing that people did, and my mom mentioned that also usually every pub had like a secret room where the guys would play, like illegally play some kind of what do you call it, like a games for money, like
casino or betting.
Yeah, betting. I think usually it was mariage. That's like a Czech card game that you can play for money, and Platinko.
Platinko se hrálo.
Platinko is some kind of a different game that's for more money. So that's but I have no idea what that game is.
That was your secret way to get rich, if it works.
Yeah, and also in these secret salons, like people could discuss kind of politics more openly and complain about the government a bit.
And how were was there also any concept of community kitchens were people ever coming together to cook food in common kitchens, or was there something like that?
Teď se ptá, jestli existovalo něco jakoby nějaký komunitní kuchyně, nebo jestli lidi jakoby se někdy dali dohromady a vařili spolu.
No, to asi spolu nevařili. Spolu nevařili nikdy, to nebylo. Dřív ty ženský jako hodně vařili doma, ale třeba se vyměňovalo, když někdo upekl koláč, tak to dal tomu, ten zase dal tomu a takovýhle. No a pak ještě, co bylo, je zajímavý, to byl třeba je ten koldům, že jo, to byl princip, který vlastně Corbusier jako vymyslel, jo, to nebyl český vlastně to přišlo s tím betonem, a ten experimentální dům funguje pořád, na trošku jiný bázi, ale jmenoval se to Koldům jako kolektivní dům a tam vlastně byly dělaný úplně minimální malinkatý byty a společný kuchyně, společný koukání na televizi, společný praní. No, teď už to samozřejmě nefunguje, ale to byl experiment, jo, to byl jeden.
So communal cooking wasn't really done so much. Usually the women from the families, they just cooked at home. But what was happening was like trading stuff around. So like if somebody baked a cake, for example, or a pie, maybe, they would give it out to other people. But about this kind of community living, there were some experiments with building houses where, let's say, the apartments are really small and a lot of the facilities are communal. there was sort of an experiment. We had one house like that, I think, to bylo v Praze.
Ne, to je
Okay, so it was in
v Litvínově,
Yeah.
na severu.
And yeah, from what I know, these experiments were done also in like other communist countries, like in Russia for a while. They experimented with. Yeah,
Někde
but
taky,
it
ale
always kind of
neuchytilo
failed.
se to.
Like, I think it was like one of these ideologically motivated experiments where they're like, yeah, communism, so like communal living, but it never worked out.
Ale co třeba bylo to, že když někdo měl třeba nějaké výročí, že mu bylo 50 let nebo svatba, tak vlastně ty lidi ze sousedství všichni pomohli, jeden pekl, jeden dělal tohle jídlo, druhý to fungovalo.
My mom mentioned that if there was like some kind of big event like a wedding or some big anniversary or things like that, then like the neighbors or people from the community, they would help out. They would like bake stuff or do things like that. So that existed some kind of solidarity.
Yeah, I think earlier, yeah, that's very interesting to know. And I would ask one question based on like what we had in the like this thing you mentioned in the beginning of our conversation. It was about softening of the communist system. So like over the decades, have communist countries generally become more open to reforms and less strict in their governance? Was it like very linear, or over the years, over the decades, or was it like sometimes softer, sometimes harsh, or was it always getting better and better, towards what we are now till 1989?
Jo, tak on se ptá na to, jakoby, jak jsi zmiňovala, že ten režim občas, že se to rozvolňovalo, tak jakoby, jak to bylo, jestli to mělo jakoby trajektorii, že prostě přes čas se to postupně rozvolňovalo víc a víc, nebo jako jestli někdy to bylo volný, někdy tak.
Ne. To právě začalo se to měnit, ne uvolňovat. Měnit se to začalo koncem roku 67, začátek 68, kdy vlastně se z těch komunistů vedoucích tomu UVKSČ udělali dvě frakce. Jedni prostě ty starý komunisti, kteří chtěli pořád, aby to bylo stejný, a ty druzí, kteří vymysleli nějaký socialismus s lidskou tváří, ale nikdo nevěděl, co to bylo. Ty se rozdělali a vlastně tím vzniklo takový trošku to uvolnění, bylo to strašně znát hlavně v té umělecké sféře, jo? Ta se prostě vzedmula, vznikly super krásné filmy a literatura a všechno. No a vlastně bylo to umlčené tou ruskou invazí, že jo. Takže tím to skončilo, přijeli ty Rusové, teď jsme měli 55. výročí, ještě rok to vypadalo, že třeba něco se bude dít, ten 69. byly velké demonstrace a tak dále, ale v tom 70. teda přišla opravdu jako za krk to utnuli a bylo to hodně drsný. No. A pak se to vlastně začalo rozvolňovat až potom vlastně, když v Polsku začala, že Walesa s tou solidaritou, tak pomaličku to šlo a potom, když vlastně padla berlínská zeď, tak už bylo jasný, že se něco bude dít. Že jo. To se ty východní Němci sem navalili na tu ambasádu, to bylo začátkem listopadu a pak vlastně koncem listopadu.
A nebylo to odstartovaný tady to všechno jako by tou perestrojkou? Nebo to je asi na velkou?
To samozřejmě, jo, ale byl to plíživý začátek, to určitě, jako to bylo odstartovaný, jo, ale tam, že byly v těch loděnicích ten Walesa, byla perestrojka, teď to bylo už leta se to tahlo, ale vlastně úplně jsme věděli, že se něco stane, když vlastně v tom Německu padla ta berlínská zeď, jo, tak to byl symbol, že jsme věděli, že něco se bude určitě dít a ono se dělo během pár týdnů. To bylo jako jasný, jo, to byl obrovský jako symbol, ta berlínská zeď.
To byla ta normalizace, že jo, a jako jestli to chápu.
Ta normalizace těžká začala vlastně po tom 68. ta těžká normalizace.
A to se postupně jako rozvolňovalo, nebo to bylo tak jako?
Ne, to bylo prostě furt, to vůbec tady, kdyby jsme byli jenom my někde izolovaní, tak se nic neděje.
To jste jako moc nepocítili, jo?
Ale tak ono to má...
Jako tu perestrojku to jste moc nepocítili, jo?
No věděli jsme, že to je samozřejmě, přijel sem Gorbačev, měl
No,
manželku úplně jinou, než byly ty manželky komunistů, mluvil pěkně, ale jako něco říkal, ale jako aby jsme tady čekali, že něco bude, trošku jakoby, tak jsme cítili, že něco se třeba pohne, ale nikdo tomu nevěřil, že jo, to prostě, oni ty komunisti měli, že jo, drželo se to strašně tvrdě, to byl
Okay. Yeah, sorry, I asked a lot of questions, but
That's okay.
yeah, we're gonna mention how it went in the Czech Republic. Maybe in the other communist countries it was different, but yeah, we're not sure about that.
Yeah.
But how it went in my country was like initially it was pretty tough communism, like very Stalinistic. It kept getting better over time. So in the year 1967, the ruling party kind of split into two factions, which one of them were the old school hardline communists, and the other one was, yeah, let's say more reformers who wanted to be more soft. Yeah, and the reformers won out. So for a while, yeah, for a while it wasn't so tough anymore, and there was less party control for a while, which could be seen a lot, let's say, in arts. So there was a lot of new music, a lot of new arts happening. But then the Soviet Union didn't appreciate it. They were kind of afraid that if this keeps continuing, then we will not be communist anymore, and I don't know, maybe we'll betray them or something like that. And so they, so then what happened was the, yeah, let's say Soviet invasion of 1968, where yeah, basically they invaded our country, and we didn't really defend ourselves for various reasons. And after that, there was a bit of a government change. At that point, people were still hopeful that something might change for the better. But then in the year 1970, the government started like a policy, what was called normalization. So in their eyes, it was like normalizing it to how it was before. So that involved, yeah, like more hardline approach, how it used to be, and yeah, less freedom again. And then my mom says it stayed like that pretty much until the communism fell. But then, yeah, in the late 80s, things started happening. Like there were like anti-communist movements in Poland with Lech Walesa, or I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, actually. And yeah, then the Berlin Wall fell, and my mom says that at that point people really knew that something will change.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
No, ještě vlastně my jsme zapomněli vlastně, že v těch 70. letech bylo obrovský napětí, že byla studená válka. Ne? A tady vlastně byl strach, že bude atomová válka, a vlastně byli jsme členy Varšavské smlouvy, čili paktu s Ruskem, že jo? Takže my jsme vlastně, týkalo se to i nás, tak to bylo jako obrovský,
Yeah,
to
okay.
bylo
So
opravdu
maybe
jako
thing
na
we
spadnutí.
kind of forgot to mention because yeah, we're so used to it, but like at that point, our country was of course member of the Warsaw Pact, which was one of the like military alliances that was opposed to NATO at that time, and both sides were armed with nuclear weapons. So people back then were living sort of every day with the threat of atomic war over their heads. So that made everything much more tense, and yeah, it could be one of the reasons why you know, we got invaded, because the Soviet Union couldn't afford at that point to you know, lose us from their power block.
very interesting detail to know. At least I did not know about that.
Okay.
And yeah, I think you mentioned about like when it started growing more and started taking like a form of revolution coming from the people, right? It was already like early 80s, I guess, right? And Would you also like to mention something about the Velvet Revolution, like they said?
Jo, tak teď se ptám na revoluci, jak se to stalo a jestli jakoby to začalo už někdy dřív v 80. letech, což asi ne, podle mého chápání, tak jestli o tom můžeš nějak mluvit.
No tak asi, říkám, tam už jakoby ten čas nazrával, jo, že bylo vidět, že se něco stane. A vlastně toho 17. listopadu, tak to je den studentstva, že jo, to byl už kdysi před válkou, že jo, prostě významný den. Takže na to 17. listopadu a vlastně, jak bych to řekla, vlastně už ty komunisti byli tak slabí, že nebyl problém, bylo jednodušší a ty komunisti byli tak slabí a ten lid, když to řeknu, jako nazrál tolik, že ten odpor už byl trochu větší než obvykle, čili vznikly tenhle ten balans a bylo možné domluvit s těma komunistama, aby v podstatě odstoupili, jo? Prostě se
Takže
rozpadli.
jakoby to bylo, že v těch 80. letech jakoby rost odpor
Jako
k ním
už-
a současně oni jak...
rost odpor a vlastně jakoby ty komunisti už taky jako slábli, protože díky zase tomu, co přicházelo zvenku, vysta perestrojka a tak dále, tak jejich lid slábl a oni začali se taky štěpit, že byli takový ty militantní komunisti a ty míň, takže tam byl třeba ten Adamec, který byl komunista hroznej, ale prostě takový jako novodobý a už se s ním dalo jednat. Jo. A vlastně jakmile cokoliv, jakákoliv homogenní skupina se začne trochu štěpit, tak vždycky do toho je snadnější zlikvidovat. Jo?
Yeah, so yeah, to be in short, it's like what...
Jo, já bych ještě k tomu řeknu vlastně, jakoby, ještě třeba jak v tom Německu, jak padla ta berlínská zeď, už teda těsně předtím, tak vlastně sem přijelo strašně Němců, že ty Němci chtěli sjednocení Německa, že padla berlínská zeď a oni chtěli sjednocení, takže prostě sem jezdili kolony Němců východních na těch trabantech, obsadili prostě německou ambasádu, protože to je území Němců, že jo. Tam prostě byla jich plná Praha a prostě bylo takový celkový jako vzedmutí, že jo. Ty komunisti začali cítit, že se něco děje a ty lidi začali být jako aktivnější, jo.
Yeah. So
prostě
what kind of was happening is that let's say over time the how do you call it? Like the antipathy of people towards the regime was growing like through the 80s, and then also when the things started happening, like I don't know, perestroika in Russia, you know, what was happening in Poland, also sort of resistance against communism, and the fall of the Berlin Wall, that kind of showed the people that the communists are also losing power or they're weak. And what happened at the same time, also the Communist Party themselves, they started fighting against each other or splitting into various fractions. And then what happened, there was a protest on the 17th of November 1989, which was already, it was a protest for the Day of the Students or something. So people went out to protest, kind of as they normally would. You know, there were usually some protests, I think. But then the police was really tough against these protesters, and then that sort of made people more angry, and then more people turned out for protests, and then it sort of happened that there were huge protests, and at that point it was obvious that the people are really angry. The Communist Party is really weak, so at that point it was possible to make a deal where basically they made a deal with the party that the communists that they will go away, they will give their power away. Řekl jsem to správně teďka tak nějak?
No a vlastně jako by to nebylo jen toho 17. listopadu, pak vlastně začaly denodenní obrovský stávky, které byly ve všech městech, že jo, tady bylo vždycky každý den prostě 200 000, 300 000 lidí a přidali se k tomu i ty dělníci potom, jo, a to bylo taky hrozně důležité.
To clarify, on the 17th November, it was the initial protest, but then it escalated into where there were strikes going on every day, 200,000 people or 300,000 people protesting every day. And at some point, even the working class, the workers joined, and I think at that point maybe the communists saw that their power base is no longer supporting them also.
And did any other factors also influenced this decision? For example, like long going rebel coming from different forms, let's say music, or some artists, some graffiti painters, for example, in the current times you see that kind of protest also. Something like that, would you like to describe?
Okay, I'll ask. On se ptá, jestli třeba na to měli vliv i nějaký jiný faktory, jako třeba umění nebo tak, jaká muzika.
Jako
No
že
já nevím
muzikou
úplně
by byla
přesně, jak to
revoluce?
myslí, ale na to se ptá.
To asi určitě, tak samozřejmě bylo nějaký podhoubí prostě toho undergroundu, ale to, že by bylo, ne, to byla prostě politická věc a tohle to bylo jenom takový, jaksi, já nevím,
Nebo
jako
to tam jako by vždycky bylo,
pocukrování toho,
ale
jo, že
jako asi nebylo to hlavní, že jo.
tam bylo to spíš, že vlastně se otevřela hranice a vlastně tyhle ty umělci, třeba ti zpěváci, kteří emigrovali, tak vlastně mohli přijet a přijeli a hnedko se účastnili těch stávek aktivně. Takže vlastně my jsme viděli lidi, kteří jako jsou šťastní, že se vracejí do vlasti a
kdy
tím
se
to bylo
otevřela
umocněné,
hranice?
to vlastenectví nějak. No. Hnedko, druhý den, první lidi přijeli 18. 19. listopadu sem.
A počkej, to o tom nevím.
Ty
A jak se to
emigranti.
otevřelo, nebo kdo to otevřel?
No prostě, no, jako už jako odmítli
No,
ty
jakože
hranice držet
celníci,
zavřený,
to
že
ne,
jo, to
jo,
prostě zase ta celní správa, tyhle prostě pouštěli lidi, pustili, že jo, tam stáli vojáci normálně,
okay,
tak
jo,
oni
to
otevřeli,
chápu,
řekli běžte,
jo.
že jo, nebo
Jako v
přijďte.
68. taky pouštěli lidi, když
No.
chtěli vědět, že jo. Okay.
No.
Yeah, so maybe one factor there was that after the initial protest on the 17th of November, like 1 or 2 days after that, the border guards, they stopped watching the borders and they basically started letting people in. And at that point, a lot of emigres or people who emigrated previously, they entered the country and joined the demonstration. And some of them were also famous people like artists and so on. And about art having an influence, like probably outside of this, not so much. But there always existed some kind of underground art that was opposed to the regime. But Mom doesn't think it played so much of a part here. It's just something that was always there, and what happened was more about politics.
And how was the experience like when the government decided, after 17th of November to not have the system anymore? How much time did it take, to adjust? Because, like everything was designed around that system, right? And then suddenly it stops functioning, and then you have to switch to a new system. How was that experience? I'm very curious to know a bit of more around that.
Tak on se ptá teď, jakoby, jaký to vlastně bylo, když teda ten starý systém přestal fungovat a pak jsem musel vlastně jít do nového systému, jak to probíhalo, jak dlouho to trvalo.
No, to probíhalo tak, že vlastně tam začali ty komunisti jednat s těmi Havlem a dalšími, že bylo ustavený občanský fórum, to byla jakoby strana nová. Tam byli lidi, kteří byli v disentu, anebo lidi, kteří byli chytrý a nemohli třeba tak se, ale něco znali, jo, třeba Klaus a tyhle tam byli. No a vlastně ty ustavili to občanský fórum, to začalo jednat s těma komunistama.
Já tě přeruším, podle mě myslí, jakoby, jako když už to padlo, teda, když ty komouši řekli, že odejdou, tak pak jakoby, jak se zvykalo na to jakoby žít v tom, jakoby v nekomunismu. Ale počkej, ještě to s ním potvrdím teda. You mean more like in everyday life, like after the communists already went away, how was it living in a new system? Right?
And how much time did it take to make a switch, from the communist system to a non-communist system? that was going to come up, how was the transition
Mhm.
basically? uh,
No, tak hm, hm. No tak určitě to byl proces, že jo, to nemůžeme asi ohraničit,
Mm.
který přesně den nebo rok to byl. Byl to proces, ale došlo k uvolňování. Začali sem chodit zahraniční firmy, mohli jsme začít podnikat, že jo, takže plno lidí, včetně mě, začalo podnikat. Bylo to strašně legrační, protože nic jsme neuměli, všechno jsme se učili a prostě nějaký třeba smlouvy, kdybych věděl, když vidím teď, tak se tomu musím smát. A vlastně byl obrovská energie, obrovský nadšení, takže všichni, byl úpadek kultury, jo, že nikdo nechodil do divadla, nikdo nechodil do kina a všichni začali podnikat, všichni prostě chtěli něco dělat a někam to pozvednout, jo. Tak tohle to bylo. A přišly zahraniční firmy, pak byla, že jo, transformace, byla kuponová privatizace, kdy se dostaly prostě podniky, ty státní podniky se dostaly do rukou prostě soukromých, no a tím vlastně to pokračovalo dál. Takže jakoby proces, jestli to trvalo rok, 2, 10,
Jo. A
to se
mám
prostě
zmínit,
nedá
jako, že to
říct.
bylo dost divoký, taky
Ale byl
jakoby,
to
že
proces.
nějaký prostě lidi byli schopní se napakovat a věděli, jak...
No tou kuponovou privatizací, protože to jsme vůbec nevěděli, o co kráčí, že jo, vlastně. Ta kuponová privatizace bylo, že každý si mohl koupit kupon za 1000 korun a vlastně tím se rozprodaly podniky a ty, kdo tomu rozuměli, tak to skoupili od ostatních, že jim dali třeba 5 nebo 10 tisíc, ale měli majetky v hodnotě milionu nebo miliard. No.
Yeah, transitioning away from the old system, like it's a process, and it's like, yeah, it's hard to say when, when it ended or when it began. But it changed a lot. Like, suddenly people could do business. Foreign businesses came to the country, and my mom says it was kind of funny because everybody suddenly tried to do a business, but nobody knew how to do it, and there was this huge energy, like where everybody tried to do some kind of business, but they didn't know how to, for example, like how to write contracts, or how markets work or things like that. She says she even noticed that people started being less cultured, like nobody went to the theater, everybody was busy doing business. And in a way it was also like really wild, because people who actually like knew what they were doing, they could make a lot of money at that time. So an important thing that happened was that it was called coupon privatization, which was like a way, officially it was a way for the state-owned businesses to be privatized.
Yep.
And it was, I don't know the details of how it worked, we can ask, but it was like you can buy a coupon for a certain amount of money, and that entitles you to like a part of the government, of what was previously a government business. But it was also designed in a shady way where, some people were able to, who understand how it worked, they were able to walk away with a lot of money for minimal investment.
Yeah, really interesting details. Must have been very um, exciting for someone to experience that. When the system was completely closed, and have that sense of freedom and to be able to do so much. So I would always focus on the, let's say, positive side of it. So yeah, must have been really interesting and exciting. Yeah.
No tak bylo to jako, když je člověk zavřený v krabici nějaký a vypustí tě na
Yeah, so
svobodu.
it
Jo. To
was
byla
like
jako úžasná
if
doba.
you're
No.
locked in a jail or in a box and suddenly you're set free.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, it was very exciting times.
Já mám jako do dneška, když jedu přes hranice a auto mi ukáže třeba, přejeli jste hranice Německa, tak mě to jako, já mám hrozný vzrušení, protože že tam nikdo mě nekontroluje, nikdo mi nic
so my mom
neříká,
says
já si
that
prostě
she
jedu. Že?
really, to this day, gets excited when she crosses like the borders, like when she goes to Germany and it shows her you're now in Germany, and nobody's like checking her for doing a customs check on her. That she really appreciates that.
Surely, why not? I mean, yeah, we are almost towards the end of this episode. But I would just like to ask you one or like two questions basically in one question uh, to end it actually. So, uh, like, was there anything from the communist times that you liked? And like a following question to it is basically how was it for the generation above you, you know, to experience the communist times, for example your parents or your grandparents, how
Mhm.
was it?
OK, tak on se ptá, že budeme uzavírat, ale že má 2 otázky. I will take the first question first, yeah. Jestli bylo něco na komunismu, co se ti jako líbilo?
Já jsem o tom uvažovala zrovna včera, protože jsem byla zapálit svíčku tady k výročí okupace a vlastně nebylo, jako určitě bych nechtěla to vrátit
nic,
ani
jo.
v té nejmenší podobě. Ne, jako nemůžu říkat, že třeba jsme měli všichni dostupné zdravotnictví, protože zase si prostě tam přišel a všichni se chovali, jako bylo to chování těch lidí příšerný, jo. To prostě, jakoby, že bych něco z toho komunismu chtěla, nechtěla bych nic a jsem ráda, že to
about the
mám za
first
sebou.
question, if there's anything that mom liked about communism, she said she was actually thinking about it yesterday, and the conclusion she came to is that, like, no, not really. She wouldn't want anything back.
Yeah, makes sense.
She mentioned that, like, in theory, for example, they had free healthcare, but anyway, like, when you came to the hospital, you got treated so badly that it was still not great, and she wouldn't want it back. So okay, second question. Druhá otázka je, jak si myslíš, že jakoby že ten komunismus prožívala generace tvých rodičů? Nebo jestli to vnímali jinak nějak?
Já myslím, že asi jak to vnímali, prostě museli to přijmout, že jo, tak asi po válce, že jo, po válce, to zase já nejsem takový pamětník, ale po válce, že jo, bylo taky takový jako vzepětí třeba budování, že jo, byly různý mládežnické organizace a budovali a prostě intelektuálové stavěli železnice a bylo nadšení, když vidím ty filmy z toho, čemuž se nedivím, že jo, protože ty lidi prožili si hrozný utrpení. V každé rodině byl nějaký průšvih, buď koncentrák nebo mrtvý, nebo aspoň zraněný. Takže určitě ze začátku bylo nadšení. Jako vždycky, když je utrpení a pak ti něco trošičku dají, tak jsi nadšenej. No ale pak samozřejmě museli asi přijmout tu realitu a ty komunistické procesy v 50. letech, no tak to se nelíbilo samozřejmě nikomu. Že? To je těžce narušená generace.
A my zmínit, jakoby, že po té válce byli nějaký lidi, co jakoby třeba byli nadšený komunisti, jako třeba byla tetička Božena, ale že jakoby potom, jak byly ty procesy všechno až 68, tak z toho jako postupně vystřízlivěli.
No jasně, že tak byli nadšený, no a pak byly procesy, kde vlastně jakoby ty komunisti požírali sami sebe.
So for the generation of my mom's parents, how they felt it, she thinks they mostly just had to deal with it. They had no choice. But maybe a thing to mention this, that after the Second World War ended, in 1945, people were really excited, and there was an excitement. People were, ready to go build new stuff. There was a big energy, and there were some people at that point who believed in the ideals of communism, and they were ready to go through the socialism to communism and build a better world. But then what happened is, in the 50s, there was a series of political processes where some people were basically sentenced to death, even for some, I don't know, ideological reasons. And we got invaded in 1968, as we mentioned. And so a lot of people who started, as true believers in communism over the time, they saw these kind of things happening, and communists eating other communists alive, and they lost their idealism, I think, most of them over time.
Yeah, yeah, good that we have uh, like so many details. Also for I think my listeners, it's a lot of insights into how those times were, and I think it would have been like such a harsh living, considering all the points that you have mentioned. But it was also like interesting to look at from the other side, like people who just came out of the Second World War were entering into a new system. So how they looked at it, and then someone who has to be born there in that system and feel it to be more like a jail, and then transitioning it to the current times. Yeah, it's such a contrast, like.
Hmm.
Yeah, but thanks for such sharing such insights and experience, Lenka, and big thanks to you, Victor, for being a co-host and uh, and helping with all the questions and
Yeah,
answers.
no, no problem. Thanks for having us, and I hope it works out with this translation format that is not too
No,
confusing
absolutely not.
for
I think
the
it's very
people listening.
unique, one of its kind, and I think it would be also very interesting for a lot of Czech listeners. Uh,
Probably not.
we'll see in the analytics. But yeah, thanks again for your time. Have a good evening. We did not initially expect it to
Yeah,
go that
thank
long, but
you.
I think it was all so interesting to listen. These are very personal stories, also very emotional for you, Lenka, I think. And
Yeah,
we really respect that. And yeah, thanks
yeah,
again for your
thank you.
time and all your answers.
Yeah.
Maybe we
Yeah,
hope to have another episodes, maybe on some interesting other topics, some other stories.
Yeah, thank you too.
chce říct něco nakonec ještě? Nebo?
No jenom, že prostě to
Mm,
bylo takhle jako všechno letem světem, že by se dalo asi povídat strašně, strašně moc, i
mm.
prostě nějaký dokumentace a takový, ale tak aspoň takový trošku jako obrázek, že
Okay. Yeah, so we could
snad
go
jsme
really deep
udělali.
into this. This was just like
Oh yeah.
skimming the surface, but we still hope it's interesting for the people listening, and that they
Yeah,
can take away
yeah.
something from
Would
this.
love to record more. So yeah,
Ještě snad to, že prostě, že jsme asi všichni, nebo většina z nás, že je ráda, že to má za sebou, že se teda těšíme z té svobody, že prostě víme, že to je něco
Okay.
nezastupitelného, ať si toho
So
i ty
yeah, to
ostatní
close,
váží.
Mom says that I think most of people are happy to leave this in the past, and now they're enjoying the freedom, and she would like maybe other people to, appreciate the freedom that they have. That they
totally
have.
agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
thanks again. We'll close it. See you next time. Bye bye. Cheers.
Okay. Thanks. Bye.
Yeah, yeah. Bye-bye.
Hello, everybody. I hope you liked this episode. If you have any particular request or any feedback, please feel free to write it in the comment box, or you can write it to our email, mapsandmetaphors@gmail.com. Also, I would request you to please consider clicking that subscribe button. It gives us a lot of motivation. Also, please like and share this video so that it reaches to the wider community. Thank you so much.